The sound of the latch sliding into place felt louder than it should have, like a verdict echoing in a silent courtroom. My hands hovered there for a second, resting against the wood, and I listened, half expecting someone to knock, to interrupt, to save me from myself. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. It felt like the world was holding its breath with me. On my bed lay the outfit. Not dramatic. Not extravagant. Just a soft cream blouse, a navy skirt that fell modestly past the knees, and a pair of low heels I had bought weeks ago under the fluorescent hum of a department store, pretending they were for a cousin. The lie had tasted metallic in my mouth. I had barely looked the cashier in the eye. Beside the outfit stood the mirror. The mirror had always been there, leaning against the wall, tall enough to show me from head to toe. It had watched me grow from a restless boy into a quiet, careful man. It had reflected my practiced expressions, neutral, steady, acceptable. Tonight, it seemed different. Tonight, it felt like a witness. One outfit, I whispered to myself, staring at the fabric. One decision. My heart thudded hard enough to make my ribs ache. I had told myself this was just curiosity, just a harmless experiment, a private exploration. But the truth had been building for years, slow and relentless. It had been there in the way I lingered in clothing stores, in the way certain silhouettes made something inside me tighten with longing, in the way I envied, not the attention women received, but the freedom of expression, the softness, the color, the movement. Growing up, I learned quickly what was allowed. Boys didn't cry too much. Boys didn't move their hands like that. Boys didn't look at dresses and imagine the fabric against their own skin. I built a version of myself that fit. It wasn't fake, exactly. It just wasn't complete. The blouse looked impossibly delicate compared to my trembling hands. I picked it up slowly, feeling the cool fabric slip between my fingers. My reflection in the mirror watched me. There I was, short hair, broad shoulders, jaw set tight. Familiar. Safe. Incomplete. This changes nothing, I told my reflection. But it already felt like everything. I pulled off my t-shirt first, folding it carefully, as if I might need to put it back on in a hurry. My chest felt exposed in the lamplight, vulnerable in a way it never had before. I hesitated with the blouse, my breath shallow, then slid my arms into the sleeves. The fabric brushed against my skin, light, almost weightless. I expected embarrassment. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. The blouse settled against my torso, softer than anything I usually wore. I fumbled with the buttons, fingers clumsy, and when I finished, I looked up. The mirror didn't laugh. It simply reflected. I didn't look like someone else. Not yet. I looked like me, just reframed. The blouse softened the harsh lines I'd grown used to seeing. It changed the way my shoulders looked. My posture shifted instinctively, as if my body recognized something my mind was still negotiating. A memory surfaced without warning. Being 8 years old, wrapping a towel around my waist like a skirt after a shower, twirling once in secret before fear slammed into me, and I tore it off. The shame had burned hot and fast back then. I had buried it deep. Now, decades later, that same motion whispered at the edge of my muscles. I swallowed hard and reached for the skirt. This was the point of no return. Shirts could be explained away. But this was deliberate. My phone buzzed suddenly on my desk. I froze. The sound sliced through the room like a siren. My pulse spiked. For a split second, I imagined someone somehow knowing, seeing, judging. I stepped away from the bed, heart hammering, and checked the screen. Just a group chat notification. A meme. Laughter in text form. I stared at the messages, at the version of myself who existed in that chat. Witty, casual, comfortably masculine. Would they still laugh with me if they could see me now? Would they fall silent? I set the phone face down. The silence returned, heavier this time. Just fabric, I muttered. Just clothes. But it wasn't just clothes. It was permission. Or rebellion. Or both. I stepped into the skirt. The zipper's faint rasp sounded impossibly loud as I pulled it up. The waistband settled against my hips, unfamiliar yet oddly right. I adjusted it nervously, smoothing the fabric down. Then I turned to the mirror. The world narrowed to that reflection. My legs, usually hidden in jeans, were exposed below the hem. The skirt changed the geometry of my body. It drew my gaze downward, made me aware of every shift of weight. I felt taller and smaller at the same time. My throat tightened. I didn't see a costume. I saw possibility. The realization hit me so suddenly I had to grip the edge of my desk. Tears pricked at my eyes, not from shame this time, but from something dangerously close to relief. All these years, I had thought the desire would fade if I ignored it. That it was a phase, a glitch, a curiosity to outgrow. But standing there, blouse resting gently against my skin, skirt swaying slightly with each breath, I understood something terrifying and beautiful. It hadn't faded because it wasn't a mistake. The mirror didn't give me answers. It gave me honesty. And honesty is harder to look at than any lie. I reached for the heels last, hands shaking again. Not because they were dramatic, they were simple, modest, but because wearing them would change how I moved, how I sounded, how I existed in space. I sat on the edge of the bed and slipped one on. The shift in height was subtle but undeniable. My posture adjusted again. My balance wavered. I stood slowly, testing my weight. Click. The sound of the heel against the hardwood floor echoed softly. Click. Each step felt like a question mark. Who are you? Who have you been pretending to be? I walked toward the mirror, heart pounding, and stopped inches away from my reflection. The person staring back at me wasn't a joke, wasn't a disguise, wasn't a punchline. She was uncertain, frightened, real. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was beginning. Would you like to continue to the next part? Next. I didn't recognize the expression on my face at first. It wasn't joy, not exactly, and it wasn't fear either. It was something quieter, more dangerous. It was recognition. The mirror had become more than glass and frame. It was a threshold. I leaned closer, studying the subtle changes. The blouse softened my silhouette, but it was the way I was holding myself that startled me most. My shoulders weren't braced the way they usually were, as if I were perpetually preparing for impact. My jaw wasn't locked. Even my eyes looked gentler. Is this you? I whispered. The question trembled in the air between us. I had always thought transformation would feel theatrical, like stepping onto a stage. But this didn't feel like acting. It felt like uncovering something that had been carefully wrapped and hidden away for years. Like unearthing an artifact and realizing it was yours all along. I lifted a hand and brushed my hair back, tilting my head slightly. The movement came naturally, unforced. That frightened me more than anything. What else had I been suppressing without realizing it? A sudden knock on the front door downstairs shattered the stillness. My entire body jolted. The sound of heels against hardwood betrayed me as I stumbled back from the mirror. My breath hitched. Every nerve in my body flared to life. Someone was here. The knock came again, firm, impatient. I glanced at the clock. I wasn't expecting anyone. My parents were out of town. My brother had his own place. No one should have been here. But someone was. Panic surged, hot and suffocating. I kicked off the heels clumsily, nearly losing my balance. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. What if they had a key? What if they needed to come inside? What if this moment, this fragile, sacred experiment, was exposed before I had even finished understanding it? The knocking stopped. Silence. I stood frozen, listening so hard my ears rang. Then footsteps retreated from the porch. I didn't move for a full 30 seconds. Maybe longer. Finally, I exhaled. My pulse was wild, my chest rising and falling too fast. I realized then that the fear wasn't just about being seen. It was about being seen before I was ready, before I understood myself enough to defend it. I slipped the heels back on slowly, deliberately this time. The act felt defiant now, a quiet refusal to retreat. If this is real, I murmured, then it deserves courage. The words sounded braver than I felt. I returned to the mirror. The reflection waiting for me looked shaken, but not erased. That mattered. I began experimenting with movement, small at first. A step forward. A turn. The skirt swayed gently around my knees, and something in my chest lifted with it. I wasn't exaggerating my motions. I wasn't trying to mimic anyone. I was simply allowing. I walked across the room again, slower now, letting the rhythm of the heels guide me. Click, click, click. Each sound felt like punctuation. I thought about school hallways from years ago, the unspoken rules, the way boys monitored each other for any deviation. A laugh too high, a gesture too soft. I had edited myself constantly back then. Sanded down edges. Lowered my voice. Hardened my posture. Survival through conformity. But here, alone in my room, I didn't feel like I was breaking rules. I felt like I was stepping out of a cage I hadn't realized I was still inside. And yet the fear lingered. What would my friends say? My family? Would they look at me and see betrayal? Confusion? Disappointment? Or worse, would they laugh? The thought stung sharply. I imagined walking into a room dressed like this. The silence. The stares. The mental recalculations happening behind other people's eyes. He's changed. He's different. He's not who we thought he was. But maybe I wasn't who I thought I was either. That possibility sent a strange thrill through me. I reached for my desk drawer and pulled out something I hadn't touched in years, a small, simple necklace I'd bought online late one night, impulsively, then hidden away. It wasn't flashy. Just a thin silver chain with a tiny pendant shaped like a crescent moon. I had told myself it was just an accessory. But I'd never had the nerve to wear it. Until now. My fingers trembled as I fastened it around my neck. The metal felt cool against my skin. When I looked up at the mirror again, the moon caught the light softly. It was subtle, but it completed something. The reflection staring back at me didn't look like a caricature. Didn't look like an imitation. She looked thoughtful, unsure, real. My eyes welled again, but this time the tears fell freely. They traced warm paths down my cheeks, and I didn't wipe them away immediately. I'm still me, I said quietly. That was the revelation. I hadn't disappeared. I hadn't been replaced. The humor, the memories, the love I felt for the people in my life, they were all still there. This wasn't about abandoning who I had been. It was about integrating what I had denied. A phone buzz again. My heart jumped, but this time I didn't panic. I picked it up. It was a message from my closest friend, Aaron. You alive? You've been quiet. The question felt loaded in a way he couldn't possibly know. I stared at the typing bar. Part of me wanted to respond with a joke, a distraction, the version of myself he was used to. Instead, my thumbs hovered over the screen as a different thought formed. What if I didn't hide anymore? The idea was electrifying and terrifying. Not a grand announcement. Not a dramatic confession. Just honesty. I typed, erased, typed again. Yeah. Just figuring some stuff out. I stared at the words. They weren't a lie. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Everything okay? There it was. The opening. My pulse quickened again, but this time it wasn't pure fear. It was anticipation. A crossroads. The mirror caught my eye from across the room, the crescent moon glinting faintly against my collarbone. One outfit. One decision. No going back. My thumbs moved before I could overthink it. Can I tell you something kind of personal? I hit send. The message whooshed away into the digital unknown. My breath caught in my throat as the 3 dots appeared again, flickering like a heartbeat. Would you like to continue to the next part? Next. The 3 dots blinked once. Twice. Then disappeared. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like I had stepped off a cliff. For a split second, I imagined every possible outcome collapsing in on itself. Confusion, silence, rejection. I saw our friendship rewinding in reverse. Every shared joke and late-night conversation unraveling because of one message. Then the dots returned. Of course. What's going on? The simplicity of it hit harder than any dramatic reaction could have. No alarm. No suspicion. Just openness. My reflection stared at me from across the room, crescent moon catching the lamplight, blouse rising and falling with my uneven breathing. I felt suspended between two versions of my life, the safe one and the honest one. I typed slowly. I've been questioning some things about myself. Delete. Too vague. I tried again. I think there's a part of me I've been ignoring for a long time. My thumb hovered over send. My heart pounded in my ears. Click. Sent. I began pacing without realizing it, heels tapping against the floor in uneven rhythm. The skirt brushed against my legs with each step, grounding me in the present. This wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't theoretical. This was happening. The dots appeared again, then paused, then appeared once more. You're kind of scaring me. Is this bad? A nervous laugh escaped me. Even now, I was worried about how my truth would make other people feel. No, I typed quickly. Not bad. Just new. For me. I swallowed hard and decided to stop circling around it. I'm wearing something right now that feels more like me than anything I've worn before. I stared at the screen. The message felt both obvious and impossibly coded. 3 dots. Longer this time. What do you mean? My pulse spiked. There was no more soft landing. No more gentle hints. I closed my eyes for a moment and inhaled slowly, feeling the fabric against my skin, the necklace cool at my throat, the quiet steadiness of the mirror behind me. I'm dressed in women's clothes, I typed. There. It was real now. The message sat in the chat window like a lit match. Time stretched thin. I imagine him reading it, rereading it, his eyebrows lifting, his brain rearranging its understanding of me. The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with fabric. Finally. Okay. Just that. Okay. I blinked at the screen, unsure how to interpret the single word. Was it hesitant? Dismissive? Supportive? Neutral? Before I could spiral, another message came through. Is this something you've been thinking about for a while? The breath I released felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for years. Yes, I typed, hand steadier now. Since I was a kid, honestly. The confession surprised even me. I had never put it that plainly before. The dots returned quickly. Are you safe? That question undid me. Not why. Not are you serious? Not this is weird. Are you safe? My vision blurred as tears gathered again. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd braced myself for impact. How ready I'd been to defend my existence. Yes, I replied. I'm at home, just figuring it out. There was a pause. Then, I don't totally understand everything yet, but you're still you. So I'm here. The words landed softly but firmly, like a hand on my shoulder. I sank onto the edge of the bed, heels still on, skirt pooling neatly around my knees. The mirror reflected someone crying openly now, not from fear, but from relief so intense it almost hurt. You're still you. The phrase echoed in my mind. I had been so afraid that embracing this side of myself would mean losing everything else. That people would see it as a replacement instead of an expansion. Aaron's phone buzzed again in my hand. If you ever want to talk more about it, I'm not going anywhere. The simplicity of that promise felt revolutionary. I typed back, thank you. That means more than you know. And I meant it. After a few more messages, lighter ones, grounding ones, I set the phone down. The room felt different now. Not smaller, not more dangerous. Wider. The mirror caught my attention again, and I stood slowly, walking toward it with deliberate steps. Click, click, click. This time, the sound of the heels didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like punctuation at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. I studied myself closely. There was still uncertainty there. Still fear of what the world beyond my bedroom might say. But there was also something else growing, something steadier. Dignity. I adjusted the necklace slightly and lifted my chin. For the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to step outside like this. Not tonight. Not impulsively. But someday. The thought sent a tremor through me. Would strangers stare? Probably. Would some people judge? Definitely. But would I survive it? I had just survived telling someone the truth. That felt like the first real test. And I had passed. Still, doubt crept in quietly, like a shadow at the edge of the room. What if this was temporary? What if I was misreading myself? What if I was about to complicate my entire life over something I didn't fully understand yet? The questions were relentless. I leaned closer to the mirror, searching my own eyes for answers. I don't need to have it all figured out tonight, I whispered. The reflection didn't argue. Maybe this wasn't about labels. Maybe it wasn't about immediate declarations or irreversible announcements. Maybe it was about honesty, one layer at a time, one outfit, one conversation, one brave message sent into the dark. I stepped back and turned slowly, watching the skirt sway again. This didn't feel like a costume I couldn't take off. It felt like a door I had finally unlocked. And doors, once opened, changed the shape of a house forever. Would you like to continue to the next part? Next. I didn't take the outfit off that night. That was the quiet rebellion no one saw. I could have changed back into my usual clothes, folded everything neatly, slid the heels under the bed, and told myself it had been an experiment. A moment. A curiosity satisfied. Instead, I stayed exactly as I was. The house felt different when I stepped out of my room for the first time. The hallway, the staircase, the living room, all familiar, all unchanged, yet I moved through them like a stranger inhabiting a known map. Every sound felt amplified. The soft click of my heels on the tile downstairs echoed against the kitchen cabinets. The refrigerator hummed indifferently. The clock on the wall ticked like it always had. But I was not the same person who had walked through this space yesterday. I paused at the base of the stairs and glanced at the darkened windows. My reflection stared back at me faintly against the glass, double-layered over the night outside. The mirror upstairs had been honest. The windows felt more confrontational. Out there was the world. In here was safety. The crescent moon pendant rested against my collarbone, cool and steady, like it had something to say, but was waiting for me to listen. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, watching the way the blouse shifted as I moved. I had expected to feel ridiculous. Instead, I felt deliberate, aware, as if my body and mind were finally in conversation instead of constant negotiation. But beneath the calm, tension coiled. Tomorrow I would wake up. Tomorrow this would still be true. And tomorrow I would have to decide whether this stayed private or began to exist beyond these walls. I leaned against the counter, staring at my reflection in the microwave door. It warped my shape slightly, making everything look distorted. For years, that distortion was how I saw myself, uncertain, fragmented. Tonight, for the first time, I felt aligned. The thought frightened me. Alignment meant this wasn't a phase I could dismiss easily. I carried my water back upstairs, slower now, feeling the effort in balancing on heels. Each step required intention. It struck me how symbolic that felt. This wasn't something I could rush into carelessly. Every movement forward required awareness. Back in my room, I sat in front of the mirror again. "You can stop anytime," a voice in my head whispered. "You can pack this away, and no one ever has to know." Another voice, quieter but stronger, answered, "But you will know." That was the tension. Not public judgment. Not family reactions. Me. Could I go back to pretending after feeling this? I stood again and studied my reflection as if committing it to memory. Not the outfit itself, but the expression. The softness around my eyes. The absence of strain in my jaw. I reached up and gently traced the line of my cheek, imagining subtle changes. Not drastic transformations. Just small shifts, growing my hair longer, experimenting with different styles, allowing the world to see something I had hidden. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. I picked up my phone again. A new message from Aaron waited. Random question. "Do you feel relieved?" I stared at the word. Relieved. Was that what this was? I typed slowly. "Yes." And scared. The response came quickly. "That makes sense. Big truths usually feel like that." Big truths. The phrase echoed in my mind long after the conversation drifted into lighter topics. Big truths demand movement. I set my phone aside and turned off the main light, leaving only the bedside lamp glowing softly. In the gentler light, my reflection looked less sharp, more fluid. The edges blurred slightly, and instead of feeling uncertain, it felt forgiving. I kicked off the heels and stood barefoot on the rug. The absence of height changed my perspective again. I realized then that this journey wasn't about accessories or aesthetics. It was about permission. Permission to feel. Permission to question. Permission to exist without constant self-censorship. I walked closer to the mirror one last time before bed. One outfit, I whispered again. The phrase had started as a boundary, a limit. Now it sounded like an opening line to a much longer story. My hand hovered over the necklace clasp, debating whether to remove it before sleeping. I decided against it. I wanted to wake up and remember this wasn't a dream. I changed out of the blouse and skirt only when it was time to sleep, not out of shame, but practicality. I folded them carefully, smoothing out every crease, treating them with a kind of reverence I hadn't expected. They weren't just clothes anymore. They were evidence. Evidence that I had faced myself and didn't look away. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the crescent moon resting against my chest, rising and falling with each breath. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed everything. The knock at the door, the first step in heels, the message sent, the word, okay. The question, are you safe? I imagined future conversations. Family dinners. Awkward pauses. Honest discussions. I imagined courage I didn't yet fully possess. Fear crept in around the edges. What if support wasn't universal? What if some people walked away? The thought hurt deeply, but another thought followed close behind. What if staying silent meant walking away from myself? That hurt more. The ceiling above me felt vast in the darkness. I closed my eyes and let the weight of the day settle. I had not stepped outside. I had not made any public declarations. But something irreversible had happened. I had told the truth, first to myself, then to someone else. And truth, once spoken, refuses to be folded back into silence. As sleep finally pulled at me, one final realization settled gently into place. Tomorrow wouldn't be about changing the world. It would be about deciding whether I was ready to let the world see me changing. And that decision would demand more than one outfit. Would you like to continue to the next part? Next. Morning arrived like an interrogation light. I opened my eyes and for a brief, disorienting second, I forgot. The ceiling was the same. The faint hum of traffic outside was the same. The weight of the blanket was the same. Then I felt the cool crescent moon resting against my chest. Memory rushed back in a single, electric wave. I didn't bolt upright. I didn't panic. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the truth settle over me in daylight. Last night hadn't been a dream. I sat up slowly, heart steady but alert, and glanced toward the chair where I had folded the blouse and skirt. They were exactly where I left them. Quiet, patient, real. Daylight changes everything. It exposes details shadows forgive. I stood and walked to the mirror barefoot, hair messy, eyes still heavy with sleep. Without the outfit, I looked like the version of myself the world knew. Familiar lines, predictable silhouette. But something was undeniably different. My gaze. There was less avoidance in it. I reached up and touched the necklace instinctively, as if to confirm it still existed. It did. The silver caught the morning light faintly. Good morning, I whispered to my reflection. The words felt ceremonial. The doubts came quickly, as if they had been waiting for daylight permission. What are you doing? Is this sustainable? Are you about to complicate everything for something you barely understand? I leaned closer to the mirror. The face staring back at me wasn't confused. It was contemplative. I'm not ruining my life, I said quietly. I'm examining it. The distinction mattered. I turned away from the mirror and looked at the folded outfit again. In the soft morning light, it seemed less dramatic than it had the night before. More ordinary, which somehow made it more powerful. Ordinary meant this didn't have to be a spectacle. I picked up the blouse first, running my fingers along the fabric. I noticed how deliberate I felt holding it, Not secretive, not frantic. Just thoughtful. The internal debate began again.
Put it on. Wait.
Take your time. Don't rush. If it felt right last night, it'll still feel right now. I took a breath and decided not to dramatize it. If this was real, it didn't need theatrics. I dressed slowly, blouse first, smoothing the collar into place. Then the skirt, adjusting the waistband carefully. I skipped the heels this time. Barefoot felt grounded, balanced. When I finally looked up at the mirror again, daylight revealed every detail. No flattering shadows. No evening glow. And still it felt right. Not perfect. Not magically transformative. But aligned. The word returned again. Aligned. I studied the way the skirt fell, the way my posture subtly shifted without conscious effort. There was no exaggerated movement, no imitation. Just comfort growing quietly in my shoulders. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my mother. Are you coming over for dinner tonight? Your aunt will be here. The timing felt almost cinematic. Dinner. Family. Normality. I stared at the message longer than necessary. This was the tension I couldn't avoid forever. The private truth versus the public expectation. I typed back carefully. Yeah, I'll be there. My heart thudded softly. Not a lie. Not avoidance. Just not the full picture yet. I sat on the edge of the bed again and let the implications settle. If I went tonight as usual, nothing would change outwardly. No one would suspect. The world would continue seamlessly. But I would know. The necklace rested against my skin like a quiet reminder. I walked downstairs again, this time in full daylight. The house didn't feel as intimidating now. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating dust particles in the air. Everything looked ordinary. I poured coffee and leaned against the counter, staring out at the street. Neighbors walked dogs. A car passed slowly. A child rode a bicycle down the sidewalk. The world was unaware of my internal revolution. And somehow, that felt both comforting and isolating. I realized something then. I didn't need to announce anything today. I didn't need to arrive at dinner transformed or explained. But I couldn't unfeel what I felt either. The real challenge wasn't dramatic confrontation. It was consistency. Could I allow this side of myself to exist regularly? Not as a secret indulgence, not as a rare experiment, but as a valid part of my life? The thought tightened my chest with both fear and anticipation. I carried my coffee back upstairs and stood before the mirror once more. One outfit, I said softly. The phrase no longer sounded like a boundary or a dare. It sounded like a beginning chapter. My reflection looked back at me, uncertain, yes. Still processing. But no longer fragmented. I didn't know what label, if any, would eventually fit me. I didn't know how far this path would go. But I knew one thing with clarity that felt almost sacred. Last night, I had chosen honesty over comfort. And this morning, I had chosen it again. That was no longer an accident. It was a pattern. And patterns, once formed, shape the future in ways you can't easily undo. I glanced at the clock. Hours until dinner. Hours to decide how brave I was willing to be. Would you like to continue to the next part? Next. The hours before dinner stretched like a quiet test of endurance. I didn't change back. That decision wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, almost casual. I moved through the house in the blouse and skirt, making the bed, washing a mug, answering emails. The ordinary tasks felt different now, not because of the clothes themselves, but because I wasn't rushing to hide them. I wasn't treating them like contraband. I was treating them like mine. Every so often, I'd catch my reflection in a window or the dark screen of my laptop. Each time, a small jolt of awareness ran through me, not embarrassment, but alertness. I was seeing myself without flinching. Around mid-afternoon, the anxiety returned in waves. Dinner. My aunt had always been observant, the kind of person who noticed when you trimmed your hair half an inch. My mother read moods like weather patterns. My father preferred silence, but saw more than he let on. I imagined walking into their house tonight in my usual jeans and button-down. Conversation would flow. Laughter would happen. No earthquakes. Then I imagined walking and wearing this. The mental image was electric and terrifying. I could almost hear the silence crystallizing in the air. I paced my room barefoot, the skirt brushing softly against my knees. I hadn't worn the heels again. I wasn't ready for that sound outside my own walls. The click felt symbolic, public, declarative. Barefoot felt contemplative. The mirror waited where it always had. I stood in front of it and asked the question I had been circling all day. What do you want? Not what's safe. Not what's easiest. What do you want? The answer didn't come as a sentence. It came as a feeling, a steady pull toward authenticity. Not spectacle. Not confrontation. Authenticity. But authenticity doesn't require recklessness. That realization settled something inside me. Maybe tonight wasn't about arriving transformed. Maybe it was about taking one visible step instead of a leap. My gaze drifted to my closet. Inside hung rows of clothes that fit the version of me everyone knew. Structured jackets, dark denim, neutral colors, reliable camouflage. An idea formed quietly. I stepped into the closet and began scanning for something softer. Something that didn't scream change, but whispered it. My fingers stopped on a pale sweater I rarely wore. It was lighter than my usual choices, the fabric thinner, the neckline slightly wider. Subtle. Unthreatening. I pulled it out and held it against the blouse I was wearing. Layered together, the blouse's collar would peek out gently. The sweater would blur the lines, not erase them. Compromise? Maybe. Courage in increments? Definitely. I changed slowly, pairing the sweater with dark slim trousers instead of a skirt. The transformation wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't the old uniform either. When I looked up at the mirror again, I saw evolution. The crescent moon necklace remained visible at the base of my throat. That stayed. It felt non-negotiable. I studied myself carefully. I didn't look like a different person. I looked like someone expanding. The tension in my chest eased slightly. This wasn't about shocking anyone. It was about not shrinking. As I grabbed my keys, my phone buzzed again. Aaron, how are you feeling today? I smiled faintly. Different, I replied, but steady. He responded with a simple, proud of you. The word hit me harder than I expected.
Proud.
I hadn't framed this as something worthy of pride. It felt fragile, uncertain. But maybe bravery doesn't have to be loud to count. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal. Every red light stretched longer than usual. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, rehearsing nothing and everything at once. They wouldn't notice. They would notice. They would ask. They wouldn't ask. The crescent moon rested cool against my skin, a quiet anchor. When I pulled into the driveway, my heartbeat picked up, but it wasn't frantic. It was alive. The house looked exactly as it always had. Familiar brick. Warm porch light already glowing even though the sun hadn't fully set. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. One outfit, I whispered softly. But tonight it wasn't about the outfit. It was about refusing to erase myself. I stepped out of the car and walked to the door, each step deliberate. No heels clicking, just the steady rhythm of my breath. I rang the bell. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. My mother smiled immediately, warm and automatic. You're early, she said, pulling me into a quick hug. Her eyes scanned me briefly, as they always did. There was the smallest pause. You look nice, she added, a hint of curiosity threading through her tone. Not suspicion. Not alarm. Curiosity. My aunt's voice floated from the dining room. Is that him? Get in here. I stepped inside, heart pounding but posture steady. The house smelled like spices and something baking. Familiar comfort wrapped around me. My father nodded from his chair in greeting. My aunt looked up from setting the table and smiled brightly. Conversation resumed almost instantly. No silence. No dramatic shift in temperature. But my mother's gaze returned to me once more, softer this time. You seem lighter, she said quietly when no one else was listening. Did something good happen? The question pierced deeper than she realized. I held her gaze for a moment longer than usual. Maybe, I said gently. She smiled in that knowing way only mothers can manage, as if she sensed a door had opened but chose not to force it wider. Dinner carried on with stories, laughter, the clinking of dishes. I contributed. I listened. I existed. And beneath it all, a quiet realization settled into my bones. I hadn't hidden. Not completely. I hadn't declared. Not dramatically. But I had shown up as a slightly more honest version of myself. And the world hadn't ended. Halfway through dessert, my aunt complimented my necklace. "That's new, isn't it? It suits you." I touched the crescent moon instinctively. "Yeah," I said, feeling the weight of it in a new way. "It is." And for the first time in my life, that small truth felt enormous. Would you like to continue to the next part?